This is Paul Schmid. Welcome to the Pursuit Zone. "34,000 kilometers, 26 countries, one gear." In 2015, Markus Stitz began his round-the-world cycling adventure on a single-speed bike. For the sake of simplicity, he abandoned not only the gears, but the traditional racks and panniers in favor of a bikepacking setup built on top of a Surly Ogre frameset. Iceland, New Zealand, Australia, and Iran provided the backdrop to some of the best experiences on the year-long journey. Markus is also the developer of a long-distance off-road cycling route around Edinburgh, known as the Capital Trail. You can learn more about Markus at his website, markusstitz.com. Markus Stitz, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Hello.
Markus, where were you born?
I was actually born in Germany, in a small town right in the middle of Germany, pretty close to the former East-West border.
Did you grow up there?
Yeah, I grew up basically grew up in East Germany until I was 10 years old when the wall came down. So it was quite a significant experience for me as a child. And then my parents, my sister, my brother, and me, we moved into a little village, a little bit about 15 kilometers out of the town where I grew up. And that's where I spent pretty much most of my childhood. So really nice region, actually. Loads of nice countryside around. So I was, outdoors a lot of times when I was a child.
I was thinking you might have grown up near East Germany or in former East Germany, because when I was reading through your blog, you had mentioned at one time that you had some Russian language skills. Is that how you developed those?
When I was a child, in the third grade at school, my parents actually, my mom wanted me to learn a foreign language. That was possibly the earliest I could learn a foreign language back at school. And back in those days, it was still East Germany, so I basically could only choose Russian. There wasn't any choice of English. And so I started learning Russian at the age of 10. And ever since then, I actually had Russian at school for about 10 years. But I must admit, my Russian is pretty much, it's kind of faded away. I've got some little things left, which were sometimes enough to have a little conversation. But yeah, my English is much better nowadays.
How did you first get into single-speed bikes?
It's a bit of an interesting story. I lived in New Zealand from 2007 to 2009, and that was back kind of at the heydays of the single-speed movement. A lot of cycle careers over there were riding single speeds, and I could never really convince myself getting a single-gear bike because Wellington is really hilly. And then I moved back to Europe and ended up in Scotland eventually. I wanted to cycle home for Christmas from Edinburgh to Schwabfeld. That's the tiny little village where my parents live. And I wanted to have a bike which is pretty simple. So when I planned the trip, I made up my mind and said, I really want to get a single-speed bike now. So I just went online and got a Swobo bike, actually, a single-speed. And that was the bike I used for the winter trip. So I cycled 1,400 kilometers in snow and ice in December from Scotland to Germany. And after I finished the trip, eventually I just got the bike for that very trip, and it was not expensive. And I thought, I'm just gonna buy it and see how it is. And if I like it, I can keep it. And if I don't like it, I bought it for one trip and might get rid of it again. But I absolutely fell in love with the simplicity. And yeah, ever since then, basically, I kept the bike and kept riding it. And I had a touring bike and I had a mountain bike. The touring bike was never really used after I got the single-speed bike, and then I converted it into a single-speed mountain bike. And yeah, that's how I just kind of got into single-speed riding. And ever since then, basically, I've been riding single-speed bikes for either mountain biking or cross biking or on the road or commuting. Everything was pretty much done in one gear.
In order to do this trip, I believe you had to resign from your job. I guess I got a couple of questions around that. One is, what was your job, and did you think about any other options besides resignation?
My last job was working as a marketing development manager at Scottish Swimming, which is basically the governing body for swimming in Scotland. So the organisation which takes care of swimming and I really liked my job and I really liked what I was doing. But the reason why I resigned from it is that doing a trip like this is always starting fresh in your life, I think, to a certain extent. You can't ride around the world for a year's time and don't change as a person. And I have, for me, and again, this is really difficult to judge for me because I think ultimately people from the outside have to judge whether I've changed or not. But I was pretty much aware of the fact that if I come back from a trip like this, I'll be a different person, and my aims and my goals in life will have changed significantly. So for me, it was just fair to resign full stop, and with the view of I'm pretty well connected in Scotland. I've worked in Scotland. I've worked in different countries beforehand. And actually, that wasn't the first time where I resigned from a job and went somewhere else or did something totally different and then came back to it afterwards. I was running a music festival in Germany for 5 years, which was pretty much my own festival, which I founded. And after 5 years, I was kind of in a position as well where I found like I've done what I wanted to do. It's time to move on. And I think I was in a comparable situation with my job at Scottish Swimming where I was really happy working there, but at the same time, I had this feeling I want to do something else. And this is why I handed in my resignation. I didn't really explore any options keeping the job open for a year or any other ways because I just didn't think that it was the right thing to do. Right now, I mean, I'm back from the trip now and I haven't got a job to go back to. Actually, the aftermath of the trip or like kind of settling back into normal life is as exciting as the trip itself. So for the moment, I just have to kind of figure out what I actually want to do in the future and where do I want to stand in life, what I want to do with my skills. And yeah, it's an exciting thing to do. And that's why I resigned from it.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I would think, or let me ask you this. Do you think that if it would have been possible to keep your job and you would have, wouldn't that have been weighing on your mind the whole time of the things that you're going to have to do when you return?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I went out on the trip with this mindset that the day I left Edinburgh, it was basically starting a new chapter in my life. And I always treated it like this. It wasn't just doing something I had done before. It was something completely new and I had absolutely no expectations. I also went in there with the thought that if I don't like what I'm doing, I'm not going to continue doing it. So if it would have turned out after 2 months' time, I don't like this long distance cycling thing. I'm not enjoying myself. I think I would have had the guts to just say, stop it and try something else. But I never did. I enjoyed every single day of the trip. Some days were hard, some days were easy, some days are exciting, on some days nothing happens at all. But the common thing across all of them is like at the moment I jumped on the bike, I was enjoying doing it. And I think, yeah, so I went out there knowing that whatever comes after the trip will be something totally different potentially. And I kind of like, I mean, during the trip, I think I needed a couple of days or even weeks and months to kind of settle with this freedom, having this freedom, not having to think about job related things, just simply enjoying a very simple lifestyle, a day which is basically centered around what you eat, where you sleep, and where you ride. It's a pretty easy thing to do in that sense. I mean, I had to organize other things on the road as well. But yeah, if I would have had a job, that would have definitely affected me, and I think I would have possibly carried this thought around: what am I going to do? How have I changed? Can I actually go back to the job afterwards, or is it unfair to my colleagues of dumping all of those experience on them? Whereas in real terms, I think first thing I recognized when I came back was nothing's really changed. Like I came back to Edinburgh, and it's still the same city that I left like a year ago. I mean, in Britain, politically, things have changed quite significantly. But on a very personal scale, no one's really moved on in that 1 year. And I think that was kind of the sober feeling when you come back. And actually, right now, for me, I'm using that as a little bit of stability. But at the same time, I'm also free to decide what I want to do next. And yeah, it was a nice feeling to have when you're on the road.
Let's talk a little bit about your bike and how did you decide on your gear ratio?
Pretty easy as well. I knew that I wanted to get a 32 on the front because basically that's kind of a really universal size. And I was pretty limited as well because the free wheels I had of choice were 16, 17, and 18. I did ride on a Halo free wheel, which I was supported by Halo throughout the journey. So I really wanted to take one of their Clickster free wheel. So I basically could choose between 16 and 18. 16 would have been way too small, and 18 sounded all right. And then I just popped the free wheel on and gave the bike a good test ride. That was the choice process, really. Nothing, no science behind it. But obviously, I had cycled mountain bikes, single speed before, and 32 and 16 is kind of a ratio where a lot of people ride on the 26-inch wheel. And as I was taking 29-inch wheels, basically, I just upped 2 sizes to match the 29er wheels. And so I came up with that ratio. And it proved to be the right ratio to ride around the world. I had no issues with that.
How did you decide on this Surly Ogre frame set?
There was actually an interesting process behind that. I had ridden a Jones bike beforehand, and although when I first looked at it and looked at the geometry and looked at the bars, I kind of didn't think I like it. And then a good friend of mine, Charlie the bike monger, he's actually based in Dorset, and I went down. He designed a travel course which is called the Dorset Gravel Dash. And he gave me the GPX file, gave me a Jones bike, and said to me, you can ride it. So I grabbed the bike, rode it, and it was a single-speed bike, and I absolutely loved the handling of the bike, and I loved especially the geometry of the bars. So from that ride onwards, I was fixed on I want to take Jones bars. And then the question was, what kind of frame do I take? Do I have anyone who wants to support me? And a good friend of mine, Pat Jocelyn, we actually met not too long ago in 2014, but we became friends, and he is actually the brand manager for Surly in the UK. So when it actually came to the trip and when I had finished my job, I kind of had to make decisions pretty quickly on what bike to take. So I gave Pat a call, we had a good chat about, and then I think we mutually came up with the agreement that the Ogre is the best bike I can take. It's got 29-inch wheels, which I wanted to have. I wanted to have bigger wheels. I didn't want to travel on 26-inch wheels. I wanted the Jones bar, and if you look at the bikes that are available on the market with Jones bars, there's basically just a choice between the Ogre and a Jones bike. And yeah, so I settled for the Ogre, and it was a brilliant choice. And another reason is as well, and that was actually the deciding factor for the Ogre, was that it's got mountings in pretty much any place you can imagine on the frame. It's such a universal frame set. It's got mountings on the fork, for anything cages. It's got mountings anywhere on the frame. You can fit any sort of brakes. You can fit any sort of bottle cages whatsoever on that frame. And there was another deciding factor for me. I wanted to have something which, if I really need to, I could fix, and I could fix things on there which I would possibly get in any country of the world. And yeah, so in that instance, there wasn't really any choice on the market to match that.
I just listed 4 countries here in my notes because when I was going through your website, it seemed like these were the 4 that kind of stood out. Iceland, New Zealand, Australia, Iran. Do you mind talking a bit about those places that you were at and talking about what some of the challenges were in each of those?
Yeah. I think Iceland was, like, when I started, Iceland was my absolute favorite country I wanted to go to. In terms of the riding, it's a really interesting country, but it is hardcore. Like, I arrived there at the end of September, beginning of October, and I was kind of like, I mean, I'm used to rough conditions from Scotland, but I was not used to what I was actually facing in Iceland. It was windy, and one lesson I learned in Iceland, you do not plan any route against the wind. So basically, wherever you had on any given day will be the direction the wind's blowing into. I made the mistake once to ignore that bit of advice, and I had to pluff into a headwind, and I was basically I was gaining no ground at all. It was just simply impossible. I think I did about 5 kilometers a day in an hour, and it was just like I could have pushed the bike and would have been at the same speed. I think for me, Iceland, the fascination about Iceland was just this sheer vastness of the country, but also it's a vast country, but just the play of lights and the colors you will get in the country, even kind of late fall, was just simply fascinating. And I wasn't disappointed in any of that. I think the tough thing that made it really difficult for me to ride over there, and I was actually stunned with myself that I did 977 kilometers in 8 days, was that it was basically constantly raining all the time. I had one afternoon where the sky cleared up, and that was just an amazing, amazing moment. And then I had one night where the sky cleared up a little bit, and that was the moment where I saw the Northern Lights. And I think for those 3 minutes alone, riding 1,000 kilometers around Iceland is just simply worthwhile doing it. It was just a moment which it's really hard to describe. I just basically stopped, and then the sky was turning all green, and I was just like totally blown away. And it was one of those moments where I actually waited for a minute before I got my camera out, because I said to myself, I really want to enjoy this, and I want to see that with my own eyes before I do anything else. And the riding was just simply amazing. I really loved the country, and the people were super friendly as well. And I stayed in hostels. I couldn't camp because it was raining all the time. So despite the slightly miserable conditions, I had a cracking time over there. I really enjoyed it. And it was actually quite a good thing as well. Having such a rough ride so early in the trip filled myself with confidence quite a bit, because I knew I had survived those 10 days with heavy rain. I had moments, I think, just to kind of picture that, I had moments where I had really thick gloves, but they got wet with all the rain. And I had moments where I simply couldn't feel my hands anymore. And that was in October. So it wasn't winter, we're talking about autumn. So it was really tough in that sense. But when I left Iceland, I had just this feeling, you know what? You've ridden 8 days in those conditions. It can't get worse than that. There we go. Off we go. So, yeah, that was Iceland. What was the next one? It was
New Zealand?
New Zealand was actually the reason why I did the trip. I lived in Wellington from 2007 to 2009. And although I had done quite a bit of cycling before I moved to Wellington, Wellington actually shaped me like no other place in terms of my riding. I picked up a mountain bike over there. I started properly mountain biking. And then further on, I was also convinced into getting a road bike. So whenever I lived in, like the 2 years I basically spent in New Zealand, I did a lot of riding. I was on my own down there, had no girlfriend. So basically, I kind of just, whenever I didn't work, I was on the bicycle. And my whole life down there was basically centered around, I worked in the arts, I worked in a theater as marketing manager. So my life was kind of 50-50 split when I lived down there, being like in this creative scene in my free time, which was quite a nice thing, and then having friends who were into cycling. And when I moved back to Scotland, I really missed that, and I also missed the country. New Zealand is a bit like, I think there's a nice term which is like Scotland on steroids. It's just, everything's just bigger and grander in New Zealand than it is in Scotland. And possibly one of the reasons why when I moved back to Europe, I went to Scotland, was that it actually reminded me a lot of New Zealand. Before I left Wellington, I was sitting together with a couple of friends in the pub on the night before I flew out. And I was kind of back in the day, possibly just jokingly saying, look, next time I come down here, I'm not going to take the plane all the way. I'm trying to cycle as much as I can. And it's kind of the thing you say, and then you wake up the next morning, you're like, did I really just say that? Because it's quite a tough thing to say, and you kind of put expectations out there. The good thing about New Zealand was also that I followed the Tua Aotearoa route, which is a brand new bikepacking route that's devised by the Kenneth brothers, who, again, when I lived in New Zealand, were kind of my heroes. They've written multiple books on cycling down there. They've built trails. They've been really influential recently by building a network of cycle trails around New Zealand. So I was super excited seeing all of those new things which I hadn't been on. And it actually turned out that most of the route Tua Aotearoa route, I hadn't even ridden. I've spent 2 years down there. And a lot of the trails on the North Island, I've never been on. And it was such a lovely thing to have, because I was a bit kind of like, if you do stuff you've done beforehand, it's a real odd thing sometimes to do, especially if there's been 7 years between them, because you've moved on as a person, you've developed, and things that were exciting back in the days might not have been. So for me, it was actually lovely riding a lot of trails that I hadn't been on. And As a country and as the route, I think those 3,000 kilometers is the most exciting bikepacking route you can find in the world. Lovely experience down there. The next one was Australia. Australia was a bit of an interesting thing because Australia, the moment I landed in Sydney, I went to a country which I hadn't been beforehand. This is where the trip really, really started, actually. I was on new ground. I had absolutely no expectation about the country. And it turned out that I always thought of Australia being quite a flat country. And I just had a look at my GPS data. It's by no means flat country. Over the roughly 6,000 kilometers I cycled across Australia, I did about 50,000 meters of climbing, which is quite a lot. Also, at the beginning of Australia, I must say I had a really, really tough time the first 2 days. I hated cycling in Sydney. It was just really, really unpleasant on the bicycle. And then I fortunately had a few people that followed me on Instagram, and they lived in Norway, which is about 2 days out of Sydney. And they must have, I don't know, they followed me and they wanted to say hello. And I think you can kind of sense of how people communicate, whether they like something or not. So after having 2 really rubbish days, one of them, Russell, actually, he let me stay at his house. And over a bottle of beer, we had a look at the route, and he sent me over the mountains in Australia, which was such a lovely decision because after day 3, I was so happy. Like, I was out in the outback from there on and riding to the lovely Kosciuszko Mountains in Australia, which are superb. And that kind of changed my whole feeling on day 3. And ever since then, I was fine with the country, whereas the first 2 days were possibly an absolute nightmare to ride. But I think all of that aside, the most fascinating thing about Australia is the Nullarbor. Those days and days and days of isolation and of that straight road. It's not flat, it's just straight. I figured out that even on the flattest bit, I did about 600 meters of climbing on a single day. So it's not as flat as you would actually imagine it to be. But getting over that bit on a single speed mountain bike with a 32/18 gearing, which basically means if you're on a straight road with even 600 meters of climbing on 210 kilometers isn't really that much. It was a daunting thing to think about when I started there. And the thing that really changed everything for me was that on day 1, or on the first day when I left Seduna, which is the start of what you kind of consider being the Nullarbor, I met a 75-year-old man, Mike. And he was pushing his trolley. He was walking about 35, 40 kilometers a day at the age of 75, which is just absolutely mind-boggling. And I talked to him, and from that moment onwards, I was just like, if he can walk 35 kilometers across this absolute desolation, also thinking how many days he will spend up there to get over that. I was just thinking to myself, if you're cycling 150k or 200 kilometers a day here, in real terms, that's not as tough as it seems to be. So, after that encounter, I was fine. And I made it over the Nullarbor in good time and really enjoyed Australia. So, in that sense, it was a fascinating country. And the smell of peppermint trees and gum trees is just absolutely amazing. And then last one, Iran. I think Iran was possibly the country I was most afraid of because I was meeting my brother there. I was cycling together with my brother. And when I didn't have time to apply for a visa beforehand, and with a German passport, the convenience of the German passport is that you can get a visa on arrival at the airport in Tehran for 4 weeks. So my brother was playing it safe and applied for a visa beforehand, and I just simply hadn't had the time to do it. So I said to him, look, I'm just going to chance it. If I can get into the country, wonderful. If there's going to be any problems, we just have to come up with plan B, and possibly meet somewhere else. It turned out that I came to the airport, I paid my 75 euros for the visa, and that was it. I had a hotel booking, which was kind of crucial to have. And that was all. So I was there in Tehran with my brother, and it turned out that it's an absolutely amazing and beautiful country. We started in Tehran, which is already at 1,200 meters of altitude, and then zipped straight up into mountains, then pretty much stayed in the mountains for the rest of the trip. The only time where we kind of descended down to lower altitude was going down to the Caspian Sea. I think the thing I loved about Iran is the people. We were welcomed everywhere we went to. Like, it was almost sometimes too much and overwhelming at times. But on the first day when we cycled out of Tehran, we stopped in this town and possibly looking a wee bit lost because I'm vegetarian, and it was always really difficult for me to find food in countries where I wouldn't speak the language properly. And we had someone helping us, taking us to a falafel place. And then the next thing, we went into a supermarket and there was someone else who was just literally offering us a box of sweets with a telephone in his hand. And there was someone on the telephone who was speaking English. And that person said, "Oh, this is my cousin, and he saw you on bicycles. I'd like to invite you to have some food." So we got invited to a restaurant, had food again. And he and a couple of other guys helped us actually in planning our route with a bit more detail. And then we cycled up a pass and we got offered a place in a restaurant to stay overnight, free food, free drinks. And basically like this, it continued the whole way to the country, and that combination of the friendliness of the people and the amazing landscape was just, I think for me, that was the country which I was surprised the most and which I loved the most to cycle as well.
One of the things that you say is that cycling is about bringing people together, but also you say that you're out there by yourself a lot of times, so there's a loneliness part that creeps in. How do you manage to find the right balance between the two of those?
I think being on your own and being lonely are separate things. I think you can be on your own and you can do your own thing. If you're in the right mindset, you don't feel lonely. You're just by yourself. And for me also, which helped, that I had long days on the bike. And whenever I'm on the bike, I don't really think about those things. I just ride my bike. And it's either challenging if you've got a long day or if you've got a shorter day. That's because you meet people on the way and you get invited for coffee. So I think that was fine. When this loneliness creeps in, and this is usually creeping in when you have a tough time and you would really like to have someone to talk to, I used warm showers quite a lot to stay with people. And those people, warm showers is for people who, mostly people who cycle, offer you a space in their flat or a space to pitch your tent or somewhere. And I think that was a really, really good thing not to fall into this trap of being on your own for a prolonged period of time, because you come to people and you have a chat. You leave in the morning, which is usually quite difficult then as well, because some of those people I really liked and some of those people I thought like I could really, really stay a day or two longer here because we've got so much in common and it was just a really nice chat about things. But then at the same time, I always had this thing in my head, I want to cycle for a year's time. So to whatever I'm doing, there is a certain time frame to it. So, I have to be really mindful not to spend too much time in order to meet other people as well. It's this constant circle of meeting people and saying goodbye. And by the time you meet someone, you will say goodbye and you possibly never ever meet them again in your life. It's just the nature of things. I think what some people just simply do is listen to music. I didn't do that at the beginning of the trip at all because I hadn't had any space on my iPhone because I wanted to use all the space to fill it up with videos. So that wasn't something I could use. But towards the end of the trip, I kind of downloaded a little bit of music and kind of tried to just keep myself motivated a little bit with that stuff. But yeah, it was just kind of like, I think using warm showers and trying to seek contact with people whenever I really felt I needed to made it quite easy. And I guess in the sense, that's why stretches like the Nullarbor were so challenging. I am a really social person. I'm not a person who wants to be by myself for a really long period of time. I don't think I could stand my own company for like 14 days in a row. I think I would I don't know, I don't think I would go nuts, but I think I would have serious problems with doing that. So I think I always struck the balance having 2 nights in a tent and then staying somewhere with people and then do another 2 nights with tent. Sometimes it's simply not possible. Sometimes you spend 3 or 4 nights in a tent just because of the nature of things. just doesn't allow it to do anything else. And that was fine, that was okay. When I knew I had to do that, then I just did it. And it was the same story on the Nullarbor. I think if you know that you will be by yourself for the whole day in the middle of nowhere, you just settle with the thought. Just try to get comfortable with the idea and just be by yourself. So yeah, and in the end, it was interesting to see my development through the trip, because I think I had issues with being by myself at the very beginning, and that's just, I think, just a normal thing, because you get yourself out of this everyday life. And for me, working in the job I was working meant I had to deal with people pretty much all the time. I hardly had a free minute. And then you go out on your bike, and if you want to, you can be by yourself the whole time. It's kind of really up to you. And I think that at the beginning was really, really tough. And it was a challenge. You grow during a trip, you learn things, and I learned being by myself, and I learned enjoying my own company.
You were putting in some big distances, several 200 plus kilometer days. How did you hold up physically?
Totally fine. I had absolutely no issues with my body. I think in a sense, taking a single speed bike was the key to that, because you put a lot of physical effort into the climbing, but at the same time, when it comes to flat, straight roads, you're very, very limited in what you can get out of your body. The fastest I could cycle, if I would go full guns blazing, was 29, 30 kilometers an hour. And I could possibly sustain that for 5 or 10 minutes. And then I would be absolutely knackered, because just the sheer cadence, the amount you have to spin on that gear ratio is just flabbergasting. So I think, in a sense, taking a single speed bike really, really prevented me on going over the top. The only time I ever had knee problems in my life was when I was on the road bike with stupidly big gears. And, you just try to hit the 50 on a straight road, and then you do it and you think, like, this is insane. The amount of pressure you put on your body here is just not what you should be really doing. I limited myself from the range I could ride. And you might sometimes think that climbing on a single speed is a lot of effort and actually possibly damages your knees. For me, it just wasn't. For me, I was pretty fit when I went into this ride. I had done a couple of long-distance bikepacking races. When I was at work, I usually cycled home for 60 kilometers each day. So I think from that point of view, I was properly trained when I went into this. So, I wasn't the sort of person who goes on a round the world trip and actually discovers cycling for himself. No, I think I came from a point that I was racing beforehand. The longest ride I did ever on a bicycle was 520 kilometers in one go. Although those 200 kilometers sound pretty daunting, to me it didn't. To me, it was not nearly as much as I had done beforehand, and it was fine.
Let me ask you a question about transitioning back into so-called normal life. Do you think that as you're trying to search for a job, that this trip will be a positive or a negative to the potential employer?
I don't think it's negative at all. And I think whoever sees it as being negative is just simply not the kind of person or company I want to work for. I think for me, this trip really was not really about the cycling in the end. It was about developing as a person. It was about, for me, figuring out some things I had done in the past. I think we all have our personalities, and I think we all have traits we can change and we can learn. And there's things we have about ourselves which we are just, things we're just doing, character traits we just have. And no matter how hard we want to try to change them to suit another person or to suit a job or an employer, I think deep in ourselves, it's really difficult to do that. And for me, I was out for a year discovering very positive things about myself, but also knowing the things I'm not good at. I think having had the time to do that after I'd been working for about 15 years, taking a year off, and it was, for me, it's possibly a bit like taking stock and really, really having time to think about, what am I good at? What are the things I'm not good at? And how I'm going to use the things I'm good at in the future. And that's basically what I'm doing right now, and it's a process. And it's also, I'm not anticipating having a job 3 weeks after I've returned from a trip like this. I'm giving myself time at the moment to think and to decide what I want to do as the next step. And the good thing about that, I live really simple and basic on the road, and I'm just simply continuing doing that at the moment. And until I've made up my mind what I want to do with my life from here onwards, whoever thinks that wasn't the right thing for me to do, I think it will be pretty much impossible for me to work there. Coming back to California, I met a guy there. Unfortunately, forgotten his name, but he did the same what I was doing, and he was a CEO of a big company now. And he said to me, we're sitting on the table with a pint of beer, and he said to me, listen, if you can cycle the world, you can pretty much run every company in the world. And although I wouldn't claim that for me at all, but I think the amount of managing skills and problem solving skills this trip has given me, that can only be beneficial for what I want to do next, not the opposite.
Looking back on the trip, do you have any regrets about it?
No, not really, to be honest with you. No, I don't think so. No. It's just I think it's a straight no. No, because it was a dream. It was something I always wanted to do, and I've done it now. Cycling is a really sustainable way of seeing the world. I didn't produce you can possibly hold against me that I took quite a few flights to get from A to B, but that's pretty much the only bad carbon footprint I have. No, I don't. I simply don't. I was enjoying it, and if I would have to make the decision again, I would make that very decision again.
Is there any question that people like myself, or you wish people like myself would ask you, but nobody ever does ask you?
Not so much, but I don't know if you know about the thing that happened with my dad during the trip.
I do.
There was a thing I didn't want to talk about at all, but I've actually changed my mind on this, because I think in a sense it wasn't really related to the trip that my dad had a bike crash and subsequently died after being 3 weeks in intensive care. But I also think, in a sense, there's a story behind this, and I was struggling mentally a lot after that happened, and I had to leave my family back in Germany, and I couldn't really be there for them physically. But then at the same time, with me going back out on the road and doing what I was wanting to do, and in a sense, my dad was a person who had never really, he was a very simple person in a sense that he never wanted to be in anyone's way. And I think in that sense, he would have always wanted me to continue what I was doing and actually finishing it. I think he wouldn't have liked me to stop the trip and kind of not finishing it. It took me a long time to cope with that, and that's something I never really talked about, but I think it's just something people need to know, because up until I went to Adelaide, I was really struggling with that. And it was, although I cycled quite a few long days when I returned to the States and in Australia, it never felt like, for me, I never had this lightness to it, this sense of I can do this. It was all very, very difficult. And I do think losing your dad or losing any close relative like this will initially put a dent in your life. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And I think for me, having gone back on the road and then actually cycled again and finished the trip, I think there's a lot of hope for people who are in a potentially similar situation. For me, it was just actually gave me, it was a good way for me of dealing with what happened. So I think in a sense, I'm much more open about the story now to tell it to people and say, look, this has happened, and, I can't turn back the time. And, as much as every one of us wished it would have never happened, it just happened. And it's also, for me, kind of like saying to people, if you're out on a bike, wear a helmet, because my dad died because of head injuries, or he didn't die because of head injuries, but he was put in a coma, and that initially was the cause for that. He actually died in the end. And for me, it's just this really strong message behind it. This could happen to anyone, anytime. And it had happened to me. And in a sense, it's just this message to people, just simply go out riding a bike and protect yourself. And think about the people that are in your life that like you, that care about you, and just don't put yourself under the risk of not doing this. I'm not saying that a helmet will actually prevent you from those head injuries, but I think in a certain sense it will actually limit the damage to a certain extent. So, it was a bit of a tricky sticking point, which I didn't want to discuss with anyone, but I've kind of made up my mind about this. And it's actually like, aside from all of the cycling and whatever things that went on in the trip, it's something that just happened, and it's just something, for me, it was also interesting. It's something that life has thrown at me, while I was out realizing my dream. And, and you just have to deal with it, and it would have been something that could have easily crushed everything, but it didn't. And, as much as it's like the whole situation is not easy for anyone in my family, but in a sense, I think for me going out there and doing what I was doing was this big glimmer of hope for everyone. And I think in a sense that was a really, really nice thing to do.
Yeah, I'm sorry for your loss, Marcus. It's a tough thing to have happen to you when you're on a big trip like that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think that if people are thinking about doing an adventure like yours, this is a good reason why not to put it off, because you never know when your last day is going to be.
Yeah, I think for me, the message I want to, and I'm planning to do talks, and I'm also planning to write a book about, but to a certain extent, it will be about my experience as a person and about how to overcome the challenges that will be on a trip like this. But I think the biggest challenge with anything like this is to actually make a decision that you're going to do it and to go out there and do it. Because no matter how you can plan things ahead, you just can't. I don't think you can plan your life. You can plan your life to a certain extent, but to a certain extent, life will throw things at you which you haven't imagined in your wildest dreams. And just having the confidence to, whenever it happens, to deal with it. What I've learned during the trip is like, no matter how bad one day will be, you never know how positive the next day will actually going to be. You sometimes I went to bed and I thought like, I'm not having anything of this anymore. And I think that's just normal, and I also had a day on another board where I absolutely hated what I was doing. I was bluffing into a headwind and I was just simply not enjoying that. And I'm always a person, if I do something, I kind of really want to enjoy it. I don't want to be miserable. I don't want to be grumpy about what I'm doing now. But you'll have days like this. But you will also have days like this in everyday life. Not every day is a piece of cake, no matter how positive you are. And it's just having this ability to switch off and to wake up the next morning and don't look back, have no regrets, just simply treat every day like a new day, and it will come with some amazing things sometimes. It also will come again with a few challenges that are thrown at you. I think it's great having been in those situations for a year, for a long time, and just using this energy to use that for the rest of my life.
Tell me a little bit about the support and the people that are supporting you behind the scenes.
So my professional background actually at Scottish Swimming and in a couple of jobs beforehand as well. I've worked in sponsorship beforehand. So I think for me, approaching people to support me was possibly a more easy thing to do than if you would just start from ground zero doing that. So I'm supported by Iceland Distribution, who are the sole distributors for Surly bikes in the UK and also for Halo wheels and Schwalbe tires. So from that point of view, I was always looking for a distributor actually to support me with a couple of brands, just because it just makes things much, much easier. And as I said before, I'm good friends with Pat now. I'm also good friends with Andy, who's the general manager. We met each other on a race in Bristol, and kind of the usual thing I think in the bike industry, you possibly don't meet sponsors in a boardroom or somewhere officially. sometimes just meet them over a nice pint of beer somewhere at a race or somewhere. And that's where we met, and we got along with each other really well. Back in the days, I was still riding for another brand. So, we initially had a discussion about what I wanted to do back in 2015 already. No, actually 2014. And so when it came to the trip, that was possibly an easy thing. I also approached a couple of other companies who, some of them I had been dealing with in the past, some of them were completely new. I had support from Nordisk, who are the distributors for Nordics at the brand, but also for Yeti. And the sleeping bag and the down jacket I had were actually, again, things I really wanted to have. So it was good to have a company who would actually buy into the idea of what I was doing and support me. Another company I really value and I have a long relationship with already is Apidura. Tori supported me ever since I actually bought my first frame bags from Apidura, but then when I went on the first trip, Tori, who owns the company, contacted me because she was really, really excited about my photography and said to me, look, if you want to get on board, we're happy to support you for future trips. So again, there was a relationship I actually had before the trip. A couple of other smaller sponsors I had on board as well. Shutter Precision is also actually a brand that's distributed by Iceland, and Tinelli, a New Zealand company. Again, there's a bit of a story behind Tinelli. I used to live in New Zealand from 2007 till 2009. And funnily, when I was in the country, I didn't ride with their clothing. And then I bought a set from my favorite bike shop in Wellington and actually recognized how good the stuff is. So I actually tried to get the stuff in the UK for a long time and had no chance of getting it here because it's a small company which wasn't distributed. And I was absolutely excited when I saw that they're actually distributing in the UK. So I got in touch with them, and ever since then was riding in their kit. And Jonah, who runs the UK side, was really, really supportive for the trip. And also Tim, who owns the company, who lives in Nelson. I stayed with him when I was down at his place in New Zealand. So a lot of those relationships were possibly more personal relationships other than just having this corporate sponsor relationship, because my trip is really much, I think it was a unique thing in a sense that I wanted to take a single speed bike around the world. That's something only I know of two people who've done similar things but totally different trips as such. So yeah, throughout the process, actually, it was nice to bond with those sponsors, and also being on the road, it was crucial because I didn't really have any major repairs. I had to swap my hub in the front once, and there was such a super, super smooth process because I was just contacting Pat. He was organizing getting a new hub. I was organizing getting my wheel built, and there was an easy thing to do because I was back in Wellington back then. I had one broken spoke, which I could happily fix myself. And then I had to change my tires once and get a new freewheel. But all of those things I could get my hands on very, very easily and without any proper hold-ups. And again, with the kit, I obviously, as you can imagine, riding with bibs and jerseys for 34,000 kilometers, you can't do that in the same set you started with. So I swapped my bibs and my jerseys throughout the trip a couple of times. And again, it was lovely having a company on board for just organizing that. So I could just pick up my stuff, put the new stuff on, send the old stuff back, and keep on riding. So for me, sponsorship, I am not a person who would actually ride with stuff I don't like. So whenever I choose a sponsor, I actually want to I want to ride with stuff which I really like, and all the stuff which is on the bike I've ridden with was stuff I really, really appreciated riding. For me, the kit I was riding around was the best kit I could get. And there was always the philosophy behind looking for people to support me. There were a couple of smaller sponsors as well, just to name them. ESI Grips, an American company that does the grips, which were fabulous. I had no numb hands. Also Spot Trackers, who provided the tracking. Life Proof, who gave me cases for my iPhones to keep it out of the wet, which was great as well. And Sine Wave Cycles as well, just a small company again, an American company that provided me with a USB charger. And last but not least, Spockworks, a friend of mine, Michael Cleveland from Switzerland, who sold me 2 stem backs and the little Jones bar back for my bike. Yeah, it was lovely having those people on board, and kind of for like over the ride, it was also nice to get their encouragement at times.
Markus, what's next for you?
I think in a sense, at the moment, I'm merging back into normal life, as you would like to call it. I think the next steps will be, I need a bit of time to think about the trip. So in terms of the trip, I would love to write a book about it. And I would also love to do a documentary about it. I've got plenty of video material. And on the back of that, also doing talks about it, because I think it's very important to do that, to share those memories and to share what I've been experiencing on the trips. On the trip, I did that to a certain extent on the road, but I also want to write it down. And I also want to be sitting there in 30 years' time, if I'm still around, looking at a book and kind of like, you did this, it's not an easy thing to cycle around the world by no means. I don't want cycling to become all of my life. I worked in marketing and sponsorship, so I'm actually looking for work in that field. May that be freelance or contract work, or I'm also not excluding the opportunity of getting a full-time job again and work somewhere. So those are the kind of immediate things. And for me also, one thing I figured out, and I think that's a very personal thing, but I think it's also a nice thing to say, is for people, I want to find the person I want to share my life with. And that's possibly the biggest project for me. And that will take a lot of time, and it will also take a lot of energy, and it also might just happen. So I think in the immediate future, those are the 3 things I want to focus on.
How can people contact you if they want to learn more?
Easiest thing is to go on my blog, which is markusstitz.com. So there's a contact formula there. I'm really happy to answer emails. It might take a couple of days to get onto it if I'm busy, but I want people to ask questions. And I think I always wanted to inspire people with a trip, and I did that to a certain extent while I was on the road. And, if someone's got a question about it, just get in touch. I've also got a Facebook page, which is facebook.com/fearlessandunique. That's also a really good way of getting in touch with me. And also Instagram and Twitter, both are, it's a really strange handle. It's Reizkultur, which is REIZKULTUR. Again, just get in touch, whatever suits you, whatever is fine. And also for me at the moment, I'm going to the cycle show in Birmingham next week, and I'm going to London for 2 days as well. I really, really love bumping into people. And some of them, I had this random encounter in London when I went there last time, and someone was just looking at me. It's like, are you the guy that cycled around the world single speed? And I was like, yeah, that's me. If people want to ask questions, just ask me. I'm a really sociable person. Whenever I've got the time to do it, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, Markus Stitz. Let's spell your website. It's MarkusStitz.com. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And congratulations on your accomplishment, and good luck with things in Edinburgh.
Thank you very much, Paul. Cheers.
Recorded September 18th, 2016. For more great podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.